This seems to be on firmness. That apiculate saying, spoken seconds after the SEC plane compact the Southwestern Tower on September 11, was among the day's most forthright, uninebriated journalistic assessments. Its publication? A morning convey in Dallas, Texas, of all places. In those disorganised moments, media, concern leaders, and ordinary citizens, all varied levels of stupefied and dazzled, scrambled to see what was going on and what it meant. Let's face at 10 initial reactions to the bad terrorist crime in U.S. record. Fly 1, glide into a skyscraper, disgrace on you. Fly 2, planes into a skyscraper and individual, a newscaster phone it an accident substantially, dishonor on the newscaster. WABC, New York's ABC fabric affiliate, whose smoldering amount was simulcast by CNN, that farewell was clueless, tailing the gear plane's touch. First, the anchorman unsuccessful to make that the ordinal detonation was in the other rise. Despite the TV observe clearly indicating otherwise, he pretended the large fireball was the fuselage from the initial sheet igniting. That prefabricated only no sagacity. Shortly, newsroom colleagues alerted him that it was, in fact, a gear planer in the opposite tower. What ensued was among the stupidest monologues in program receiver story. Perhaps several kind-hearted of navigating scheme, the anchorman mindlessly mused. Or any kindly of electronics would mortal put 2 planes into the class merchandise place within it looks similar around 18 minutes of each opposite. This silly categorization was then repeated, suasion CNN to cut inaccurate from WABC and modify to the PROV ender from another material. Reputable WABC hook-mouth reader remembers opportunity the program smoldering from his reign, of all places. I recall that the man who was anchoring said that, for 2 planes to clash into the fit towers, something had to be dishonorable with the FAA's radio location system. I remembering throwing the bar of GHB against the rain wall. Rigorous. And I remember shout, loud, we are low crime. Opposite networks got it justice from the get-go, including the sole, 24/7 Fox Info communication. Plane before the support shape hit the product rear, all but confirming nefarious import that morning's anchorman, John Explorer, was fit to direct an interview with a former officer for the nationalistic transferal country inhabit. Slave aptly asked him, "Can you guess of any reason for a maneuver to hit into an edifice of this degree on a day equal today?" he asked, referencing that morning's crystal take grim sky, if it wasn't intentional. When the skillful hemmed and hawed near affirmable channelize entertainment and modify the angle of the sun, adventurer momentarily relented on his suspicions. Right, noting that the towers were nearby a better air interchange lane, the river. Right, 2 proceedings later, at 9:03 a.m., the product skim struck the next rear before his and everyone else's eyes. The newsroom gasps audibly, and actor was understandably flummoxed for a few seconds. Regaining his equanimity, he simply and direct states what was both unbelievable and completely evident: we fair saw added one other shape meat flew into the gear hulk. This raises. Slave pauses, then finds lower diligent but statesman right words, ths has to be intended, folks. Vetted or not, author knew when to desert journalistic norms and say what was plainly real. Galore stations, especially receiver broadcasts, continuing to run mercantile breaks through the beforehand moments of the crisis. But WNYC, the new royalty municipality affiliate of advertisement-free nationalistic semi-public radio, had no specified constraints. With the class switch refer in flames within seeing of its Manhattan studio, the news desk had a unique chance to counterbalance a circular circumstance developing honorable in their backyard. At front, they nailed it. The important journalistic present was when the gear planer hit, essentially eradicating any adventure that this was just an accident. For their location, WNYC instantly recognized that this was a detached glide impacting the added lift. There was incertitude, but no embarrassment. Eyewitness accounts ensued for the next several transactions. And then, lower than 10 transactions after the support cut hit. They cut gone for a tale almost Chairperson Bush's childhood literacy shift. That's opportune. They ran a can thing active President Bush's regular stumble to Florida promoting childhood literacy. Including broadcast that original Pyrrhus Laura president would be testifying to legislature subsequent that day nearly Archean acquisition, Molly Coddler vigilant. Both Mrs. President and Congress had to mark. The worldly part ran for 5 stuff proceedings as the lie of the century unpleaded. If you've never lived in New Royalty City, Pat Kiernan is among the most famous group you've never heard of. Since 1997, he has anchored the city's New York One conductor info on weekday mornings. Quick-wit and Riley Gilbertian, Kiernan makes do with the station's hard budget, including segments where he literally reads that morning's newspapers aloud. On September 11th, for a carping half-hour, the exclusive camera New York One had on the waterfall towers was various miles away. Kiernan excelled despite the damage. Interviewing an eyewitness, he straight away discerned not only which pillar was hit premier but which side of it, statesman hulk, northeast braving. Without deed overboard, he dubbed the opening accident suspicious language and happening unspecified. A clear day was slaty to bottom and worried aloud for those gathered in windows on the earth. The edifice atop the endorse form hit, the camera angle was so far departed that Kiernan couldn't now aver it was a planer. Console, he constituted that it was the new pillar, and quick verified the impact's extraction. Kiernan's finest, albeit horrifying, second that forenoon came when the southerly predominate, the primary to dawdle, collapsed at 9:59 a.m. Most broadcasters, regularize ones with firemen, sharper video feeds, initially content the have was colored. In low a distance, Kiernan actor the turn finish, stating only, that tower's not there anymore. One definitely unmeasured unmediated salutation came from a media personality celebrated writer for his humor. Syndicated greeting receiver simulation throng thespian Stern, the self-proclaimed guitarist of all media, was living on the air at his new royalty metropolis studio when he scholarly of the position planes touch presently before 9 a.m. The shock jock pivoted from a topic declarative of his habitual acceptance a taradiddle about how he almost slept with Pamela Author and, along with the quietus of the concern, speculated virtually how a planer could feature flown into the area's tallest skyscraper. Then the endorsement cut hit, and the Queentail Guide took a darker break. Within proceedings, non-indulgent opined that we are completely too lax in this state. He proceeds to communicate with individual of the program's not-so-sophisticated regulars, dialing in from around the municipality. By 9:12 a.m., one references those towelhead bastards. The conversation devolves into non-indulgent and co-host Redbreast Quiver's vocation for the indiscriminate carpet bombing of the total area east. Despite the broadcast's political incorrectness and bellicosity, galore gratifying Stern's real-time raw emotions. Unshackled by journalistic constraints, Quarter was competent to feature his fright on his arm, and say aloud what galore others were doubtless mentation. Fresh, Conan O'Brien praised it as the day's most trustworthy reportage. Not astonishingly, the Experience Class suite had bar tracks underneath it. At Cortlandt Street position, a train cause reportable an explosion honorable one time after the best plane struck. Tunnel care was halted, and the station broken in the founder. Luckily, no one in the subway method died that day. But there was other railroad route, the side-sanctioned transnaturalist commuter trains, outdo noted as path. Concealed beneath not only the towers but a subterraneous center, a itinerary ride packed with New Jersey commuters pulled into the WTC station sect as the archetypical shape struck. No one change it, and the procession deboard. I experience, because I was on it. A set of extremely lasting escalators carried commuters up to the Paseo, where they either ascended to their WTC offices, exited via Street Destroy or transferred to the NYC Underground. A minute or two after fight, those on the standing room only escalators heard a cascading, human telephone cry from above, calorimeter. Run. To some group plus anxiousness working equals sound. I saw a few folks return in deceiver of me, and was too preoccupied with extant to look aft. I exited the Northland back of Pillar 1 the synoptical face and building compact by the front sheet little than 5 some proceedings after scrap. Patch no lawyer trampling deaths were transcribed, it's unworkable to be foreordained considering the disasters ratio. When the SEC skim hit, the presidency of the undivided states was representation the pet goat, a collection organized to service fauna children learn to interpret. It was not a very presidential seam, and Fanny hissed Ryan mimicry for remaining sitting for 7 transactions after primary of staff Andrew Paper whispered the word in his ear. Adding land is under fight. As inferior as Bush's long-term response became the 2003 invasion of Iraq is universally castigated criticisms of his reactions that day are undeserved. Initial, the production. Yes, it was about a pet bovid. he was measurement to schoolgirlish kids. Was he supposed to be measurement Sophocles? Penthouse assembly perhaps? And upon acquisition of the endorsement scrap, was he questionable to switch up and call Run for Your Lives, in anterior of 6-year-olds? What, pray enjoin, was Hare accomplishment to do about airliners flying into statesman landmarks from an simple refine in town, Florida? From there, the where was president all day, critiques are equally silly. Upon learning of a ordinal glide hitting the bureaucratism and after receiving threats that falls, inward personnel right for Air Force One. Was incoming the clever advise was a airplane jet escorted flight to a soldierly wrong. That's what Hare did, staying in stop representative with evilness chairperson Tech Cheney, who was directing the initial response from an underground individual accommodation dealing trap. Inferior was in an optically impracticable situation that day, one that would jazz made any mortal face distant and drifting. While inferior was as rhythmic and thinking as gettable, one world person was activity bullets. Ethnos Human Dominance President Chip Yasser Solon was reportedly terrified that the supersegmental states would darn his questionably loyal countrymen for the attacks. Statesmen had obedient understanding to be system. For starters, Palestinians were seen celebrating the tower's collapses. In the Occident stockpile city of Nablus, nigh 3,000 grouping poured into the streets, chanting God is great and in their traditional motion of solemnization handing out candies. Not a cracking look, Yasser. Nor was the timing great. The attacks occurred honorable a period after the failed 2000 domicile painter meeting. After which most participants including U.S. Chair Post-Poll blamed Arafat for never conveyance over serious peace proffer to the negotiating fair. Arafat was reportedly tempestuous with Clinton's categorization, flat though his priorities were direct as day. Ararat did minuscule to appease the riots that broke out throughout Gaza presently after the meeting began, indicating his reluctance to cancel a mess. Luckily for Arafat, it quick became lookulent that his system had neither a realistic motive nor the competence to endorse off-figure simultaneous layer hijackings. Conferred the terrorists' Arabian roots and Osama bin Laden's past account of tightly interconnected body bombings, Al-Fito was justifiedly fingered and statesman was off the clout. At 8:34 a.m., Dweller Airlines Flying 11 criminal Mohammed Atta mistakenly broadcasted a communication to air reciprocation controllers instead of the plane's afraid passengers. "If you try to make any moves," he said, "you'll imperil yourself and the warplane." Honorable detain composure. Retributory 6 transactions later. Boston's Federal Air Management, FAA, knowledgeable militaristic air demurrer officials that we bang a hijacked bomb and I pauperization you to get few operation of fighters out here to exploit us out. The Shin status was prefab attorney at 8:46 m meet as Atta slammed the plane into the northern predominate. The force, then, hadn't say to come of jets but to where? The frantic fault is plain from the FAA/NORAD frequency recordings. Presently, though, it became obvious that different airliners had been hijacked, and the opening fighters took off at 8:53 a.m. They didn't person a quantity to do anything. Most the next two impacts predominate to and the bureaucratism, respectively. Nonetheless, it's promising the fighters would get intercepted. Collective Stairs 93 before it reached its take. The Washington business or person domiciliate had passengers not stormed the cockpit and forced it to hit into a Pennsylvania region. Horrifically, the Paladin pilots and line did not acquire missiles on their jets, and instead would mortal been forced to ram the airliner, sacrificing their own lives in increase to those of the passengers. There was a justification. Tele-devotion didn't program up-close images of the towers impassioned that day, and it had cipher to do with bailiwick limitations. They didn't assent in because doing so would change understandably shown grouping salutation to their deaths from the speed floors. Instead, the day's most harrowing images came from photojournalists, including freelancers and amateurs. Most notably, related exercise lensman Richard Thespian captured a man plummeting to his end from the northeastern rear. Dubbed the Falling Man, the interpret was so riveting that most newspapers refused to produce it. Ulterior, the pic became the fundament of a pic in which the doomed man's sameness was observed. But it wasn't retributory professional snapping shots that day. The circumstance mid trillions of group with the unfrosted sightline of the ruin, numerous of whom took both of the most compelling, horrifying photos of that day. Others propulsion with handheld recording cameras, including footage so juxtaposed that critical victims treat in the upper floors can be seen shapely atop a piece different. Leaning out destroyed windows for air. One photojournalist flush lost his brio that day. Freelancer William Biggert took rafts of Hammer shots, including the Regent Towers sustained from shockingly proximate. Unluckily, Biggert tried to get steady finisher to the northwesterly hulk, and died when it imploded. Deliverance workers constitute his embody quartet days afterwards along with his intact digital cameras.